Talbot Consulting. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm joining you here from Harlem in New York City, where it's 40 some degrees. Um, so I want to introduce Tanya Lewis, who is the Culture and Climate Consultant for TSL Consulting, and she's joining us from Brooklyn, where it's also 40 some degrees. And Lydia Logan, who is the Executive Director of Verizon Innovative Learning Schools, and she's joining us from DC, right? Okay, and then where I don't know what the temperature is, but anyway, probably warmer than here.
Not much.
And then Mary Nicely, who's the Senior Policy Advisor for the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction and the California Department of Ed, who's joining us from Sacramento?
Berkeley, California.
Oh, Berkeley. Okay.
It is 55 degrees.
Oh, well, not much warmer, a little bit warmer. Okay, great. Well, it's good to see you all. And so I wanted to just start out with some session norms. We are in this technology challenged way going to try to make this an interactive conversation. Our goal is to provide a lively group conversation with you guys to have maximum participation. We have muted everyone, but if you raise your hand, well, can't raise your hand in the Hoover, but if you let me know, I'll unmute you so that you can interact with the discussants. And so you can either pose a question for written, or you can pose, you can let me know, and if you want to ask your question verbally, okay? So I'm gonna just go ahead, if you guys don't mind, I'm gonna go ahead and jump right in. So with the first question, which is to literally find out who is in the room, and I have kind of lost my Hoover again. Find out who's in the room. Hey, Lydia, can you help me out? Because I can't now see. Oh, there we are. Okay. So if you guys could just let us know in the app, if you're a teacher, a school administrator, a student support services person, or a policymaker, etc. If you could just give us, I'll take a look at it and running tab of it to see. We just want to get an idea of who's in the room so we can tailor our remarks. So in the chat box. Okay, it looks like we have a teacher, school administrator, and authorizer. Oh, hi, Barb. And a state leader. Okay, so does that help, discussants?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so we want to first start with a participant question. And this question is asking you guys what we want to basically know: what equity challenges have you encountered in your quest to maximize access to quality virtual instruction during the pandemic? So, anyone?
I just put the question in the chat as a prompt for those of you who may want to refer to it as you're thinking about your answer.
Great. Audience, that's for you. What equity challenges have you encountered in your quest to maximize access to quality virtual instruction during the pandemic? Anyone? Staff development. Okay. ELD instruction suffers. Yep, we're hearing a lot of that.
Mhm.
Access to the internet. Student digital skills. Interesting. Okay. Access to Wi-Fi in certain communities. Lack of broadband. Student lack of access to internet. Lots of connectivity issues here. Student engagement. Oh, older siblings caring for younger siblings.
Mhm.
So you guys, can you also talk to us a little bit about like what have been your persistent or ongoing challenges? Are all of these ongoing, or are there ones that you've solved, but now you're still having some issues or challenges? Student tech skills. I can relate to the tech skills situation. Lack of devices at home. No time for development, quality improvement. Okay, that's key. All on, all ongoing. Teachers with their own kids at home. Yes, we're all experiencing that one. Yep. Multiple users at home, so draining the broadband, right?
And I'm assuming that's also multiple users with not a one-to-one ratio, right? So many users trying to use one device.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to pose this same question to our discussants. What challenges do we face in our efforts to increase access and improve equity for quality virtual instruction? So we talked about this earlier as a group, and we talked a little bit about. I'm going to start with the technology piece, and Mary, primarily because we're seeing a lot of the connectivity challenges at home around connectivity and access. And Mary, do you want to start us out with some of the challenges you've seen?
Sure. With the state of California, and I see Pam Gibbs is on, that we've faced, overnight a shift to 6.5 million students having to learn from home. And California has a little bit of everything. We have desert, we have mountains, we have urban areas, and knowing that this connectivity issue is two different, in our eyes, probably two different issues that are going on. One is in our rural areas where we have no infrastructure. That is a long-term ongoing challenge for us, for sure. And then in our more urban areas and low-income areas, it's just the affordability. And so that is an ongoing challenge that we've had is with connectivity. On the device front, with the governor's office, we actually started a something called the Bridging the Digital Divide Fund with our governor and the state board president, and raised about $18.5 million for purchasing devices to donate to schools that did not have them. And then we had a internet service provider that donated 100,000 hotspots as well. And then we had a technology company that paid for service for 3 months for those. So the technology, that's definitely an ongoing issue. We were fortunate that the governor and our legislators gave us $5.3 billion to be able to try and address this issue. And many of our school districts and county offices have stepped up to spend a lot of that money for either connectivity needs or for devices. But we know that that's an ongoing and that's a one-shot deal, and it's not sustainable for us when we need to refresh equipment. So this is something that has become a huge challenge for the state of California and a huge priority for the Department of Education.
All right. And I know we had also talked about some of the challenges around social and emotional conditions. Tanya, what you want to kind of talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Like in addition to many of the things that were mentioned here, like student engagement and what have you, there's also, being that we are now in this pandemic, in this virtual world, a lot of anxiety that individuals are dealing with, which makes it even more difficult for relationships to be built. And so between the socio-political climate, between intimidation of technology, I mean, I can speak for myself that every time I have to do something like this with a Zoom, my anxiety, skyrockets, because I have to have at least 3 other people tell me, how do I stop the email from binging? How do I do this? And
Right.
to be them responsible for now doing this on top of, whatever else you're supposed to be responsible for in terms of teaching has become a big issue. We are also seeing and experiencing a lot of people who are, they're having their own traumas. The adults in the room are not feeling what's going on with the pandemic. They're not feeling what's going on with all of the unrest. And so they're having to deal with their own issues in addition to dealing with at-promise students who have a less bandwidth to handle more issues that they're dealing with as well. So while we've always known that relationships matter, relationships are the way that you can connect. Now more than ever, it's required, and it's much more difficult to do that, building that kind of intimacy over Zoom. And so we've been challenged to figure out how to make those connections through pieces of technology.
Yeah, very, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we also talked a little bit about this challenges associated with delivering quality programming. And Lydia, you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. We work with a few hundred schools, 264. All of them are Title I schools, and we provide free training to those teachers. And we've seen some of our schools come up with some innovative ways of managing uneven levels of technology proficiency with teachers. One of those is we have schools that have chosen to have, for instance, all of the math teachers plan lessons together rather than on their own. And that way, if you have some who are highly proficient with technology and others who have low technology, you can mitigate some of the anxiety of the ones who are lower, right? They all have content expertise and they all have experience being in front of a live classroom. But this new context is, as Tanya said, anxiety inducing for the adults as well as for the students. So to the extent that you can work with some strategies that help the adults, you can somewhat also mitigate, right, that being transferred to the students. And so the other thing that kind of a strategy does is, if someone gets sick, if someone has small children, if someone has elder care, if someone has a reason why they can't be on camera for synchronous instruction at their given time, the other teachers they've planned with are able to be a backup, moderate breakout sessions for them, maybe pick up and take over a class. They may be able to share Q&A right through the LMS or whatever other platform you may have. They can help to back each other up. And we know that even in a live setting, sometimes teachers feel isolated, right? They do their own planning, they go into their own room, they close their own door, and that is their class. And now people are feeling, in general, much more isolated since they are at home and trying to figure things out on their own. This collaborative practice is a way to really help the adults find some more collaborative time and to really, guard against some of the things that may make instruction less productive, not just for the adults, but also for the kids, right? They can share ideas about how to make lessons more engaging.
Yeah,
right.
The other thing I would say is there are ways to stick with standards that do not require, and some of this depends on how your schools are thinking about attendance policies, but to do assignments that are not necessarily due every single day, the way that you might do it, again, if we were doing live synchronous, right, in-person instruction. You can have assignments that are multimedia, right? You may submit something that's typed, or a video, or an audio, or a some other way of demonstrating your learning that isn't necessarily just, I'm going to give you this assignment and you're going to give it back to me in the morning, because of all those issues you all named in the chat. Maybe they don't have enough devices to be online at the time that that class session meets. Maybe they are watching younger siblings. Maybe they do have, right, other things going on in their home. So thinking about the kinds of assignments and the way that you're using time to help students open up the opportunity to demonstrate their learning without penalizing them for what may be happening in their homes.
Great. And so Rhett, can you ask your question? You said something about okay, I'm trying to unmute you.
Quality for virtual declines when school begins to add in person.
Yes.
Are you able to unmute Rhett so he can?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, that's something I'm hearing from parents primarily in the state right now, is as schools are looking to move back to a hybrid model where they're bringing in students in person, that those students that can attend in person because of their situation, their health situation, their family's needs for in this crisis, that what's offered to them, it gets scaled back greatly, and so they're seeing a huge decline in what's available, the quality of what's available for those students that have to keep doing remote learning.
And is that because they're trying to do synchronous learning with some kids in the class and some kids streaming that same class live, and it's one teacher, or do you know if there are other reasons why?
I think they aren't trying to stream the in-person classes. That's they're trying to have the teacher present for the in-person classes, and so they lose the staffing to support the remote learners.
Oh, but they're not doing synchronous. Basically, the teacher's not teaching at the same time. Is that what you mean? Right.
Like okay. Before, when our schools are in full virtual models, the teacher's doing some Zoom synchronous learning, stuff like that. But as they're starting to bring kids back into the classroom, they're having to change that model up, and they're losing that synchronous virtual model in exchange for this in-person model that isn't accessible by all students.
That's interesting.
Okay. And yeah, that is kind of interesting. Where are you, Rhett? What state are you in? Where are you?
Washington.
Washington. Okay. Yeah, because we've seen, and Lydia, if you want to jump in, we've seen synchronous blended where some of the kids are at home at and they're say class starts at 9 a.m. So they're at home at 9 a.m. and then there are a few kids in the classroom at 9 a.m. So everybody's in the classroom, so to speak, at the same time, learning with their teacher as they would if they were all sitting in front of the teacher physically.
Yeah. And I think there are, I can name a couple of ways to manage that. I'm by no means saying this is the only way to do it, but and some of this is where professional learning for the teacher really comes into play, because it is a sophisticated instructional model to try to do live with half of the kids in your class, or some portion in the room with you and some portion online. But doing a group do now where they're all doing the same thing, whether they're at home or in the room, and then almost going to a rotational model where the kids in the room are doing some work on their own, and the instructor is able to then do small group with the group online and then do some small group with the group in person. But it means that they need to have some experience in doing some sort of a group, right, rotational model. So that's one way to handle it. That of course depends on, do the kids at home, right, have devices? Are they tech savvy or not? Do they have any experience with this sort of thing? So that there's a certain tiered kind of what can you do given where the instructor is and where the kids are. The other option, if again your context will allow for it, would be to send out something to all of the kids the night before. So it's almost the flipped model, where all of the students have what will happen the next day, and they've had that in advance, and they are given some period of time to review that, whether it's one night or more. And then class time is really for work with the teacher. It's more a tutorial kind of a setting where you're doing maybe some quizzes, some formative assessment, some checking for understanding, and again, some smaller group work that can work with who's in the room with you and who's online. I think the big problem is when you try to treat online instruction as though it is live. It's not the same thing. It's not nearly as engaging. You have to plan for engagement with students. You have to ask them questions. You need them to be right. If they're never called on and you're just doing chalk and talk or stand and deliver or whatever you want to go, right? We don't do that for good instruction in a classroom. If you do it online, it's, you are sure to lose those kids.
Yeah.
So thinking about ways that you are making sure those online students are engaged and that you are spending time with each of the groups of students who need you. Again, not easy and requires some training and some practice, but it can work.
I want, oh, go ahead, Tanya.
I was just going to ask, some of those districts I've worked with have required that all students have cameras on. Some have said not. And I know that based on certain home environments, having the camera on is something that makes you feel very vulnerable. But it also, having the camera on ensures that we know that the student is actually paying attention. So I was just wondering if anyone has had any thoughts either way of how they've dealt with that challenge. As we're talking about just the challenges that we have seen and are experiencing, is that something that has been any of the participants, I guess, have dealt with?
And feel free to put that in the chat so that we can.
And the reason I'm bringing it up is because we've had situations where kids are laying in their bed doing their work because that's the only space that they have that's theirs. But then it becomes very difficult to seem engaged, when you're laying down looking at the computer. It then often, I think, at least some of the instructors feel as though that student isn't taking the work seriously. They're not, really engaged. They look bored. They fall asleep. But it's also because they don't have the space, the proper space to do the work that is conducive to them sitting up and, being able to use that tablet. So I was just wondering if anybody else has had those kinds of experiences and those kinds of responses, because again, these are a lot of the things that we're now being exposed to is people's home lives that we weren't exposed to. You might have known, but you didn't know. And now you're getting more and more opportunities to know.
Right.
Yeah, and we're trying to, we're facing that when it comes to grading, because we're seeing some districts some schools or teachers are, if you don't have your camera on, they're taking points off of And so these are things that we're working on with guidance to say, hey, let's rethink some of these, because what we're starting to see are a lot of D's and F's, and they have nothing at all to do with the actual work of these students. They have to do with whether or not they have their camera on. So, as we talk about climate and keeping kids engaged, and just the trauma of, I got an F because I had my camera off. Those are those things that we're really trying to evaluate and trying to help our counties and our schools to kind of look at how do we look at the silver lining of this pandemic, unfortunately, to kind of like reassess even what we are looking at as actual learning and understanding of the courses or the lessons or the subject matter. Is it, what is it that we're really trying to do here? So, but yeah, we've heard a lot about cameras not being on because of there's an equity issue as to where they live. They're embarrassed by their siblings. And a lot of it is they don't have the bandwidth for the camera anyway.
Right.
So technically there's all these other things that go into why this is just so difficult. And it is such a huge challenge that no one thought we would have to be in still.
Yep.
Right. And so that's what we're constantly trying to figure out, is like, oh my gosh, this was supposed to be 3 weeks. This was supposed to be 4 weeks. This is supposed to be in the fall.
Yep.
We're back to being 100% remote again.
Right.
Yeah.
So Mary, we had quite a few statements and about broadband, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, and what can folks do? I mean, given in some ways it's quite embarrassing as a nation. We are not a developing nation. We're a post-industrial nation, and no matter if we have mountains or fields or congested urban cities, we can't even get across the country 90% of students online. I mean, we're kind of spoiled here, in New York City, because the district was able to get most of the students online. But what kinds of things? We have some policy makers in the room with us. If you could wave a magic wand, what would what would that look like? What would we, because this issue around equity, there's equity in terms of delivery, but there's equity in terms of access. And right now we have far too many kids, particularly in the middle of the country and in the southern part of the country, that aren't connected at all. And so what would you do if you could wave a wand?
If I could wave a wand, there'd probably be two things, right? So the two wishes that I would want is in the short term, the thing that could probably be most effective quickly. And Verizon has worked, a lot throughout the country in working with our school districts to be able to tap into their own networks to get use the power of the high-speed network that we have in the state of California to deliver access to kids at home. Unfortunately, the danger of that is that E-rate does not allow that, period. And so we are in danger, our school districts are in danger of being penalized across the entire state of California once somebody the FCC kind of says, hey, are you cost allocating? And if you're not, problem, right? That's like a short-term thing that could be fixed. Of course, like a lot of money would also help. The other thing is really in a lot of ways, making access to the internet a utility, like electricity or water. We talk about that a lot because we do have, unfortunately, providers that absolutely will not go into a community if it's not worth it to them. And that is something that is really problematic because it's not just school. This is, when we're talking about social emotional health and what we're doing in California with SEL and with a counseling coalition that we put together and all these different kinds of things, if a kid doesn't have that, their family doesn't have it. Family doesn't have access to telehealth. Family doesn't have access to our unemployment programs. They don't have, so this is not just about education. This is about entire communities that are being left behind because they don't have the infrastructure that they need. And so those are the two things. It has to be looked at as a utility to get it to everyone that should have it, because you cannot participate in anything, the equity issues surrounding these communities that don't have access are just, it's really this pandemic has just shown a light on this inequity that has been around for decades. And hopefully there's a silver lining to this, that we can come out of this stronger with more federal, state, all the funding that we need to fix this at last. So those are my wants, like billions of dollars to fix it, and people who will.
Well, and then even short of that, I mean, the like changing some of the regulate, like E-rate. I mean, I think that would be helpful, and then just the the utility piece. I think one of the things that you mentioned that's important is this is not just equity around education, and Tanya, I want you to kind of weigh in here, but you can't participate in health. I got sick early in the pandemic, and my doctor was very adamant about me not going out of my apartment, and she basically kept diagnosing me daily through telehealth. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't have that. I would have had to go to the hospital, stand in line with people who were very sick, and probably gotten sicker. And so, and then you think about the economy. We're ordering groceries online. We're ordering everything online now. And so when you think about this economically, you think about this in terms of education, and then you think about this in terms of, Tanya, you talked about relationship building and how, so one, relationships with your teachers, relationships with your peers, and then the trauma associated with not being able to touch them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that no matter where you live or what background you have, right now, this is a very isolating time. And, some of us are very fortunate to live someplace where we have others that can quarantine with us. But there are, many people who end up being by themselves. And one of the things that, a lot of our communities have built their strength around is having a support system. And that support system is what allowed for us to be able to work, have somebody else pick up our child, make sure that things are going on at home. You have the lady down the street that watches 6 and 7 kids, and then you pick them up after work. Well, all of that had to stop. And so our village, our village has been altered significantly. And when you add the layer of, and then I don't have access to even Zoom my family members, people become very isolated. And the way that, I've had a long career working with young people who, we're at risk of lots of things. And the way to connect with them has always been through our relationship of getting to know them and making them feel safe. And now very few people feel safe in any, no matter where they are. So connecting that way has impeded on engagement. It's impeded on people, or our young people even wanting to participate, but just in the community as a whole, if you don't have that opportunity to connect with those that you've always connected with, the seniors that can't go to church. I have many elder women who relied on me on Sundays to take them different places to get their groceries, to pick up their dry cleaning and what have you, because I had the car. In New York City, that's a big deal. I had the car. And they can't even come out to go to church, so they don't have just that once a week where they had a long conversation where they could tell me whatever it was that they were telling me. Some of them feel comfortable, but a lot of them don't have the computer savvy to be on Zoom, and they're lonely. So there are many people that their families are being altered significantly. Major events are happening, and we don't have the way to connect. And a lot of the families that are most impacted by COVID, as we know, are the Black and brown families, right? There are also a lot of the families that are impacted by what's happening with lack of access. So yeah,
And so, Tanya, I was going to ask you, so what would be some of the strategies that when we think about the the barriers that technology provide, and in terms of relationship building, what strategies would you recommend as staff are trying to engage students on a daily basis
Right.
remotely?
I do think that checking in is just as important as any of the academic work that they're doing. And there needs to be time included every single day to check in and see where people are, where everyone is at that moment, how they're feeling, as well as being as transparent as you feel comfortable with sharing where you are. And that actually builds the connection, because we're all experiencing it. But that means first being open to recognizing that this is not normal and I don't feel the way I usually do, and it feels very uncomfortable because things are going to trigger you throughout the day. And so to know where you stand and how you feel and what things are making you feel very raw or very sensitive, and then checking in with those that you're working with. If you're working with younger people, checking in with the parents as well. There are, like you said, a lot of older siblings who are responsible for the younger siblings. So you'll have a 16-year-old who's trying to learn, but they also are responsible for maybe their little cousin who's 6, who's in 1st grade, and they have to do both. And so checking in to understand what's going on right now and how frustrated are you, and maybe you can't participate this moment because you got to turn around and make sure that the 6-year-old is okay. But if we don't share our challenges, if we're not really communicating and we don't create an environment that's open to communication, you're not going to get people who are engaged in the lessons. We have, one of the things that I've been doing is creating professional development trainings that I usually do. I have 45 people in a room. I do a training. It's all day. Hopefully they walk off knowing how to be restorative or how to do whatever it is that we've trained. That's not happening anymore. And so rather than us gathering everybody, even in smaller groups, we started doing pre-recorded trainings and asking people from that particular school district or that community to record the training that we've designed. So it's one of their colleagues who can share stories of how it's impacting them in that environment, and they're making it available so that when you have time, you can see it. So it's not that PD is from 2 to 3 on Tuesdays. It's PD gets launched and then you can see it when you have time to see it so that you can get something out of it. So those are some of the things that we've been working on, just recognizing that not everybody's ready at 3 o'clock after staring at a computer all day to now go through a PD on how to be engaging.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I wanna just follow up with a question and then head to Lydia about some development stuff. But when we talked before, you talked about the some strategies and the importance of understanding that staff themselves are facing trauma.
Right.
And so can you talk about like strategies that schools can use to take care of their staff, so that their staff can take care of the students?
Well, some of the things that we've come to realize is that smaller groups works better. So if you put people into smaller chats where there's no more than maybe 5 people and give them the opportunity with, some thought about what the questions are. So we used to do circles. Well, this isn't a circle, but it's the same idea, and have people start to share some of the things that they're experiencing, and you change those groups on a regular basis, it allows for us to acknowledge that this, you're going through stuff as well. And how do I, as an individual who is experiencing this trauma, take care of myself, right? Because if you don't do that, you're really not going to be able to connect and work with your students. But it does mean that we all have to have, grace for each other. We have to be able to recognize, I'm not going to get the best of you, and that's just the reality. We're going to try to work to make sure that we can get you to as much as you can offer, but based on the way things are right now, people are emotionally stretched. There was the example of the teacher who is a parent and has young children at home that have to learn while she or he has to teach. That's a stretch. And so if people are given the opportunity to say, hey, this is what's going on with me. So just like that student might not be on camera, I can't be on camera right now. Or, I can't take this particular period block because it's the very time that I have to make sure that my 7-year-old is taking a test that's being required of them that particular day. But if we don't acknowledge that and we just act like the only people that are being, challenged are the students, then we're missing something. And that's actually something I've been promoting well before this. Every time you're in a community where I've done trainings where we're talking about, you have to really engage with the parents, and they're like, yeah, but they just had layoffs last week, and I don't know if I'm going to get laid off next week, and I don't know if I'm going to pay my mortgage. I'm not in a space to engage parents right now. I'm in a space of my own crises. And so this, we know, is generic for everybody, and acknowledging it and helping people in smaller groups, particularly in the chat rooms, I think is one of the ways to address that, as well as giving PDs where people can take it when they're ready to, is another way.
Great. I wanted to, audience, please, by all means, if you have questions, please put them in the chat so I can recognize you. I wanted to, Lydia, just find out from you any tidbits around, staff development. Tanya hit on the small group piece, etc. We know that we have particularly with this student population, it's already challenging. And then to really have this added on top of what all the school people have to do. Tips around staff development.
Sure. I would certainly reiterate what she said about making sure that PD is offered in a way that's flexible. So if you want to do it in a synchronous way, great, but make sure there are asynchronous options for people who cannot attend at those times. So they shouldn't feel like they've got one bite at the apple, right? And it isn't necessarily just a recording, but ideally, if it is going to be something like a recording and a do on your own work, and they're going to feel just as or more isolated than they were before, have some sort of group share out afterwards. So what did you learn? So they can then maybe discuss it together with other people who did it on their own also. So whether it's office hours or something, some way for them to still have that collaborative time. And I put in the chat sort of main themes of empathy, making sure that we're not just thinking about empathy as it relates to the students, but also the adults.
Yeah.
Vulnerability, so allowing the adults to be vulnerable, and that may be saying, I'm not that great with technology. I know this subject matter and I'm here to learn with you, and my job is to be a facilitator of learning, not a purveyor of knowledge. And so let's work in this new platform together. And if you are a student who is really great with technology, I may ask you to sort of be my co-facilitator while we are, managing this lesson or unit together. And grace, saying, acknowledging as the adults are not perfect. We are doing the best we can with what we've got. And and I ask of you what I expect of myself and my peers, which is I'll bring my best, you bring the best you've got at the time, and let's try to, extend grace to each other while we are getting through this. I think it does help students to see adults being vulnerable, where that gets a little bit scary. Is you don't want some adult divulging all their personal businesses to kids online, right? But allowing them to understand that this is not like when we were in classrooms, and I think particularly we're seeing with veteran teachers who've taught for a long time, and they own their classroom and they own their topic and they know their classroom management style and strategy, and now they are like in Oz, right? So helping everyone to understand that this is not just new for the students, and in some cases it isn't new for the students, right? They've been chatting online and communicating online and managing different virtual platforms, and it is newer to the adults than it is to the students.
Right.
Most of our schools have student tech teams. Those student tech teams in schools that have them have also been providing tech support to the teachers.
Right.
And that's been hugely helpful, because the other thing is that students don't feel empowered right now. And I think it's important to understand that a lot of people are feeling helpless. They're feeling helpless about what's happening in the country. They're feeling helpless about what's happening in their homes. They may be anxious about, the pandemic or violence or politics or, any number, employment, any number of things.
Yep.
Any way that you can give students some autonomy and some voice and choice over what's happening to them in a way that they can feel some ownership, whether that's the way that you're managing assignments, the way that you're asking them to show their learning, the way that you're asking them to show up, right, for class or for school, what school looks like now. I think thinking creatively about what that looks like is always going to be more engaging than trying to just take what was and flip it online. Like, we know that doesn't work. So I'd say that. I would say absolutely figure out ways for teachers to get the PD that they need. That may mean doing some basic assessments of them and saying, how many of you are, we're all using Zoom. How many of you are comfortable? We have a, free introductory lesson. We can pair you with a buddy. We can, have virtual lessons. We can do bite-sized PDs. There are a lot of things. We're offering free training. ISTE's offering free training. There are lots of opportunities for high quality instruction that's both virtual or synchronous, live, synchronous, asynchronous. You can get the help that they need, but you also need to have some idea of what they need. And if you are introducing new tools, and I think to some extent, I'd say limit the new things that you're going to offer, because that can also be anxiety provoking.
Right.
You shouldn't have anything new without the training to go with it. And it may mean that you do less that more people are comfortable with, rather than trying all the new whiz bang things that everyone says are so great and are going to make things so easy. If it means you've got to roll out a whole bunch of new training that you haven't figured out how to do it.
Right.
So PD, making it available, making it accessible when it makes sense for the adults, making sure they still feel connected, and going back to those themes for everyone of empathy and vulnerability and grace.
And Mary, there've been some of our clients that we've worked with, we have indicated to them that they should, in this time, think a little differently around some of the rules and regulatory pieces that have been, like, what does attendance look like? Marking a student absent because they're taking care of their younger sibling, and then eventually at some point they sign on. I'm like, so I think they should be present. You know, so there are quite a few rules that we have in traditional school that don't merge well with this new environment. Attendance would be one, enrollment is another one. You know, a lot of districts across the country, if you're not enrolled for 10 consecutive days, you know, do you go on the drop list at that point? And when I think particularly for this population, that's a problem. Um, so any thoughts around that? You know, I'm sure there are other
Yeah.
rules.
Well, one thing I actually wanted to add on to what Lydia was just saying, because one of the things that we are doing for PD is all these outside forces that our students are trying to deal with right now. And so we launched the superintendent launched a Education to End Hate initiative, and around PD for our teachers who are struggling with how to talk about George Floyd, how to talk about Islamophobia. And we actually kicked off yesterday with one, because we're so close to Thanksgiving, with Native American, teaching about Native American pedagogy. And it was we had over 300 teachers on, and it was so interesting because they were so like, how do we talk about Thanksgiving? What should we be doing? So I think, and then the next one is on Islamophobia next week, and then one on anti-Semitism, and then one around Black Lives Matter, one about anti-Asian hate coming out during COVID. So our teachers really are handling so many different things, and we're trying to also help them in PD to just talk about how to talk about these things that their students are struggling with. So I wanted to add that in as something that we're doing and recording and having up on a YouTube channel that we've created for a lot of teachers to be able to go back and watch and have ongoing discussions with the instructors that we had from these different communities, so that they have someone to be able to talk to when they have more questions. But around attendance, you know, these are things that are really challenges for us at the department, because a lot of it's legislated, right? It's policy. It's like we're the ones who are implementing something that either the State Board of Education has put in place. We have local control across our state as well. So we can't actually tell people what to do. So it's like, here's our guidance. And so I'll tell you, like right off the bat, you know, like the attendance form that our people put out was, I mean, half the teachers in the state were probably going to quit after they saw this thing that was created, and not from the lens of teachers. It was taken from the lens of our finance people, who said, well, we have to do this. This is state regulation, right? So we have to do it. So with that uproar, I said, hey, did we field test this at all? With anybody before it, you know? And so this is something, and because I came in with the superintendent 2 years ago, and we're not, you know, I'm not an educator, right? I'm a policy person. I'm actually a database programmer, right? So for me, it was really weird for me to see that we're not actually going out to our stakeholders to understand what's going to work for them. And especially for like our students that are at Promise, right? These are, you know, we're struggling with our foster youth and our homeless youth. There's just so many challenges around that. And so it's really us talking to the teachers. How were you dealing with attendance before? What does this look like? How do we get to those kids? And so these are policy issues that we're having to come back to our legislators with, saying, hey, look, you know, this is like old school stuff. The world has changed. We have to be, because we don't know when this is ever going to go back, but these are always challenges we always had. So this is not like this was new. We've had issues, you know, chronic absence, even for kindergartners, right? It's like, what is causing this? What are our challenges that we need to be able to look at? And that's why, you know, we have a $45 million community schools grant that's out right now to understand how do we really address these systemic issues that have been problems in our schools forever, and we can't use the same old rules. And so, so we're in discussions with policymakers all the time around who's going to fix this? Who's going to change what we implement? Because you got us kind of stuck right now, even with testing. You know, we don't have a waiver this year, right? We don't have a waiver. So what have we had to do? We've had to say, okay, federal government's not letting us off the hook again. And so we've had to go and figure out a short form assessment, a different version. We're having to work with our testing companies to say, okay, what can we do? Because no matter what, somebody wants a measure of something, right? And so
Right. And
yeah, so.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that if we haven't learned anything throughout this is that I think you said it really well, Mary, is that, these challenges have existed pre-COVID, but they also have illuminated for people who don't know, and who are in the system, who don't know that school can no longer be an island of itself. Education has got to start working much more closely with Health and Human Services, and like you said, foster care youth, like we had here. Tanya will tell you in New York City, once the district finally got like 700,000 kids online, and then they said, oh gosh, what about the kids in the shelters? Okay, we didn't think of that before. And so it has really brought to bear the challenges that are associated with each of these agencies being a silo in and of itself. And then at the same time, the rules. Anyone, audience, questions that you have we have 4 minutes left. Anyone have questions?
I'm dropping a couple things in the chat because I know we're running down to zero and the rate for time, but some things that may alleviate some of the access issues. And for those of you who are policymakers, understanding if E-rate doesn't change, it's going to be difficult for providers to participate, but so much, right, and work with states on the solution, which would mean community-based ISPs being built and other solutions to still get access. But right, there are regulatory barriers. So I think there are some things that don't get out there where people are saying, why aren't the providers doing more? And this is one of the reasons. So new administration is coming, whether now's the time to make recommendations.
Right.
Around attendance are tied to funding, are tied to testing, right? So the idea was we can't have accountability for tests. If kids didn't show up, how would they have done well on the test? So we want to make sure they show up every day. So that's going to be a requirement, right? And now that's biting all of us. So if there are new ways we should be thinking about attendance and assessment, it isn't that, in my opinion, that assessment should be eliminated. It's what does it look like in this new context, so that we will be able to look back and say, students learned, this is how they learned, this is what they learned, this is what they didn't learn. If we go to zero, we just got surveys back from our districts that are fully remote, where the state announced there would be no testing, the kids stopped showing up. So I can't say, I can only speak from our experience with our schools, but I will say if the kids think it doesn't matter, they will behave as though it does not matter. And so that's a consideration. I think how we use it and how we message what the assessments are for, that's something different, but I would think about what your plans are based on what you want to see and how you want to reshape what learning looks like.
So I'm gonna just kind of close out. We have like a minute and a half left of some of the key points that we discussed. So when the question around challenges, broadband, it seems to be more of a problem than devices. And both situations right now, we're in a temporary fix. But Mary and Lydia have both talked about some policy changes that can happen in order to increase access around virtual learning. Like make it a utility and then change some of the guidelines in E-rate. Tanya talked a little bit about just everybody recognizing that we've got folks that are isolated, students that are isolated, young people who are not feeling connected, staff who are not feeling connected. And I love the way Tanya put it, that our villages have been altered. And so, so we've got to figure out how to rebuild those villages one relationship at a time, to support everyone who's in the village. She talked about check-ins. And then Lydia also talked about how we can look at PD differently, and how we can engage both staff and students in ways that continue with the quality of instruction that's provided, and then also, that people kind of walk away with feeling a little bit more connected. So I think that's it. If anyone, we are at 3:30 Eastern time now. So you guys, thank you. It's been great. Good to see your faces, and signing off.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks for the